off his own neck, like he saw once in a strikingly vivid Hong Kong martial arts film. It wasn't a prepubescent death wish or an expression of Hemingway-style machismo, unlikely for a 10-year-old, but simply an act of boredom. He was convinced that regular daily neck twists, vigorous of course, would eventually allow him to look backwards 180 degrees like an owl. "The boy with a breaky neck," Uncle Mustafa would exclaim to his wife. "Look at that damn city boy, he got twisted off your own head." And he would move alongside the birds. Autumn leaves on the front lawn. Some were recent, from the last 10 years. Feroz could tell because he recognized himself in these few, his gawking brown child's eyes beaming back at the camera like a ghost from his past, peering back at him through the lens in a twisted, knowing grin. A face almost forgotten now that years had filled the emptiness he had left behind. Feroz lingered upon these a while, but found no comfort in them. The man they portrayed, sometimes sunny-clothed, often adrift upon a fishing raft or drinking rum on the porch of a stilted house, was a stranger to him. If someone had pretended to discard them, were of a man Feroz had never seen before. The Indian man was tall and skinny, good-looking the way scrawny rock-and-roll stars are supposed to be good-looking. His black hair was oiled in every picture and pleated flat against his scalp. One photo that caught Feroz's eye was of this man. He did recognize the gummy India ink, typical of all his parents' documents, and the big flourishing R's, his mother's trademark. But who was Raj? Some Indian man from Trinidad looked pretty much the same to Feroz. Beneath him, an abscess on a calm blue face, rests a quizzical pointed island upon which a swarming body of ants sways with undulations. Feroz sees the one ant who is unlike the others. It is alone and devious, locked into a circuitous hunt. A black Indian panther on his turf, Raj stalks the pristine beaches, consuming rum and women like sickly and slow Asian deer, muscled and directed.
با سلام به هموطنان عزیز and good evening to everybody. First of all, I have to thank to TSA our publication, especially Noor Jahan Aziz, who accepted my manuscript and did a wonderful job to publish Two Sisters. Also, I have to thank Anne Decter, who did the first editing, and I know what a hard job it was. It is to edit an ESL language and change it to a literary language. Unfortunately, Anne hasn't been able to be here because she's running another book launch tonight for Macmillan Books. The cover of the book is done by my daughter Shirin, who is not here, and I miss her a lot. The photo is taken by my son Arash, who is here, and he's a poet as well. Tonight I'm going to read one of my stories. I'm sorry that it's not a happy ending, because I'm coming from a country that laughter considered as an offense. And right now, writer and journalist has a very hard time in my country. It was one of June's beautiful days, the day he saw her for the first time, sitting on a chair on the veranda, as he did all days when the weather was fine. Sipping from a cup of tea, he had absent-mindedly sunk into his melancholy daydreams. The very pleasant weather, the silence of trees, the birds' random song, far away or close by the bright slanting sunshine, the house surrounded by deep silence and happiness, enthralled him for hours. In the front yard, a bird was singing clearly, a sad, sharp song evoking his memory. He searched through the branches but couldn't find the bird. Only he saw a woman sitting on a bench knitting. At first he thought it was an illusion. He blinked a few times and watched carefully. The bench seemed unusual to him there because the neighborhood had big houses with a vast backyard and front yard, with rocking chairs, benches, and fancy swing. In the 2.5 years he had been living in the house, people usually passed the street by car. Nobody sat on the bench. He noticed the woman, but he couldn't see what he was knitting from the distance. Occasionally, she lifted her eyes and looked around. He forgot about the bird song, and when he reminded it again, he couldn't hear it anymore. But from perhaps a few houses away, another bird sang languidly. Then there was silence again, not even breeze whispered among the leaves. The sun's rays slanted further and brightness faded. He lifted his cup. It was empty. He couldn't remember when he had finished his tea. He would have liked to have more, but he didn't want to move. Staring at the woman, he wondered if he had seen her before. Her hands moving harmonically, her head tilted to the left with a slight bow in her back, she reminded him of his own wife. Of her children. So his wife went back home and didn't return. They had come here together to see their elder son, who was a doctor and had a happy life with his wife, a dentist, and two young, healthy, beautiful daughters. They came to this country after a long separation from the elder son and saw their grandchildren for the first time. Those 6 months were enjoyable. The son applied for the immigration paper. They could stay as long as they liked. But his wife couldn't stand to be far from her other grandchildren who had lost their father and were still very young. So she left him here and returned. He felt jealous of his grandchildren, but he said nothing. He knew when that she wanted to do something, nobody could stop her. After she left, life was not easy for with his son family. There were always small conflicts between him and his daughter-in-law or his grandchildren. In telephone conversation with his wife, he begged her to come back and always received the same answer, "I will." He decided to live alone by himself to persuade his wife to come back. His son wanted to rent an apartment for him, but he didn't like those high, huge buildings that reminded him of the hives. So he lodged him in a house belonging to a family his age. The house was big, located in a rich, quiet, and beautiful neighborhood. The man liked the house, the street, the trees, and the people who, whenever they met him walking in the empty street, greeted him kindly and exchanged a few words with him that he barely understood. 6 months after his wife left, his daughter-in-law called him and informed him that his wife had a stroke. He couldn't believe it. His son took him to his house to console him. He called home every day, but nobody answered. He called during the day when his son and his daughter-in-law were at work, and his grandchildren were at school. Finally, he heard a voice on the phone he didn't recognize. She told him she was his wife's sister and sobbed like a person sobbing over a bed. She informed him of his wife's death, but he couldn't believe it. Sometimes the man sitting on the veranda staring at nowhere, fully occupied with his melancholy daydream, convinced himself that his wife hadn't died yet. A faint illusion filled his mind, and she was back there and waiting for the immigration paper in order to come here. When he saw the man and the woman in the house and how happy they were together, when they invited him for the 50th anniversary, he was sorry he never remembers his own anniversary with his wife, who was kind and gentle and never raised her voice. He was surprised that he never noticed how good she was to him and how she took care of him. He wished he could go back home and see her knitting beside the fireplace in the winter, knitting or reading a book. He never asked what she was knitting or what the book she was reading. The sunset spread all over as he stared at the woman, who stopped knitting. She stood up and, without looking around, left the bench and walked away. She walked to the left, towards the sunset, and turned left into the narrow alley connected to a small grove with trees woven in each other and disappeared. The summer was not over yet, but the day with fine weather had grown fewer. The leaves on the tree turned red, yellow, brown, and into a mix of color. The sky was more blue and pure, and some days were grey and covered with clouds. The cool breeze turned to chill wind that made him shiver when he sat on the veranda. But he took a coat or sweater and sat on a chair and waited for the woman. She had always the same dress and knitted with a grey thread. The man didn't talk to anybody about her. He knew that nobody would believe him, nobody would see her. He feared that if he talked about her, they would disturb her and she might not come anymore. He wanted to talk to her himself, but he didn't know when to. He didn't have the courage. Whenever he felt very strongly the desire to talk to the woman, he remembered his own wife. He thought of her loyalty and couldn't decide. His wife seemed innocent as a victim of death. When he accepted that she was dead and wouldn't come back, he felt a deep sorrow, was pushed into a deep melancholy. He wished that woman on the bench were his wife, or at least his wife's shadow or soul coming to see him. These feelings were sweet and evoked him more dreams. Now he was dreaming about their wedding anniversary, a very luxurious anniversary with many people invited, a big cake and a beautiful gift for her. He saw the woman sitting quietly knitting or staring at nowhere. He sank into his own dream until darkness covered him and the cool breeze of the end of summer made him shiver. He looked at the bench the woman had gone. He stood up. There was a pain in his muscle and his heart. A gloomy shadow covered his mind. He went into his room, turned the TV on, which his son had bought for his 81st birthday. The faces they wore the scene were unfamiliar and weird to him. He didn't understand what was going on, what they were talking about, what they were laughing at, what they were crying about. He lay down on the bed, the program ended, the commercial was shown, and then another program came up. He just wanted a voice in the room. He remembered that when he was living with his wife, she was usually silent. They talked occasionally. It seems they had nothing to talk about, but she was there. She always answers his question, even he didn't answer her, always. She who was kind, gentle, and quiet. He was never alone, and if he was sure that she would come. She would come home, and now he didn't know if she would. Sometimes he dreamed she would return. He dreamed about the woman on the bench. He never asked himself who she was, where she was coming from. He was sure she came because of him, and this certainty made him feel better. The sorrow faded in him. Feeling hungry, he went to the kitchen to eat the food the landlady had left in his fridge. He warmed it in the microwave, and sitting by the table, he ate his food. Whenever the man or the woman came to the kitchen, he smiled at them absent-mindedly, talked to them using a few words he had learned, and again sank into his dream. Summer turned to autumn. Fallen leaves crayed under his feet. The wind howled among trees and impressive in the windows. It was not possible to sit on the veranda anymore. Whenever he sat there, someone advised him to go in, or the cold weather sent him in. He put a chair at the window in his room and sat on it, stared at the bench, waited for the woman to come. Then he saw her covered in heavy coat with a black scarf sitting there knitting. A stream of joy flew through his heart. He was sure the first snow fell before it was really winter. The street was covered with snow and ice. Winds were gusting. The weather grew colder. The man was waiting and thinking about the next spring. A heavy snow fell. Everywhere was completely white. The bare trees were covered by snow, and the branches looked full of white bloom. At 5 o'clock, darkness spread everywhere. The snow shone under the street light. The neighborhood was so quiet that he imagined that life had vanished from the earth. Waiting by the window, he felt lost, sad, and wished for death. When he saw the woman sitting on the bench, he didn't know when she had come. Perhaps he had lost track in his gloomy dreams. She appeared and sat on the bench, and now she was there, in a heavy coat, scarf, and boots, still knitting. The man shivered with joy. He remembered his decision. I should talk to her. He put on his coat, his hat, his scarf, his boots, his gloves to leave the house. The woman in the house asked him where he was going in that terrible weather. Ignoring her question, he left the house, enthusiastic to talk to the woman. He went toward her. She got up and walked away. She walked the same direction that she had walked all those times. He followed her through the small groups. The trees were like white ghosts. The wind howled through the icy branches. The woman looked back and smiled at him. A strong feeling of joy warmed him. He walked faster to reach her. And now I invite and Rima Banjari. Yes, sorry. My name is
Thank you very much. It's the beginning of any puja, and